You want to do an introduction for?
Oh, nice.
Doing it. Has, would you like to?
Pat is gone.
Well, I can do, a quick one, but you might know.
That's okay. Go ahead, yeah.
Okay. Well, welcome to the seminar series today. I'm pleased to introduce Jason Metnick, who's the Senior Vice President for Customer Affairs. I'll read a little bit of what Mr. Metnick does. He's a Senior Vice President. He works directly with companies in the wood, paper, and packaging supply chain, including forest landowners, manufacturers, merchants, wholesalers, converters, printers, and end users to promote the SFI program, which we'll hear about today, and provide market access to SFI organizations. He also oversees the Office of Label Use and Licensing. The SFI Office of Label Use and Licensing has over 850 organizations across North America. So with that, I'll turn it over to Jason to hear about your work.
Great, thank you so much. I'm guessing everyone can hear me okay in the back? Okay, wonderful. So yes, my name is Jason Metnick. I'm Senior VP Customer Affairs at the Sustainable Forestry Initiative. I've been with SFI for 25 years. It will actually be my 25th anniversary this summer. And so I've seen a lot of growth, a lot of evolution with who SFI is today compared to who we were in 2001 when I first started with SFI. So I oversee essentially now the standards pillar at SFI, and I'll get into more of the different pillars of how we're organized at the Sustainable Forestry Initiative, but that's essentially my oversight. So I oversee how our standards are, our labeling procedures, our auditing procedures, how companies get audited to our standard. But most importantly, a lot of the marketplace falls under my umbrella as well. So how we're building market acceptance and awareness of SFI, how we're interfacing with big brand owners or investors or government regulators to help build that market demand of the Sustainable Forestry Initiative as a credible assurance for forest products and how they're manufactured and harvested and produced. That falls under my umbrella as well. So SFI and Clemson, I'm just going to have two really quick slides. We've had a long, great partnership between SFI and Clemson University for many years. The experimental forest is certified under the SFI Forest Management Standard, and the campus is the first organization that is certified under our new SFI Urban and Community Forest Sustainability Standard. It was certified just this last March. And the first campus, first organization, there's now a second one in Canada, York municipality, which is basically a suburb of Toronto, is also certified under our new standard. Pat Layton, who is now back in the room, was on our board of directors, but turned out just, I think at our last board meeting. And so Pat's been on our board for the last 6 years, and we held our Project Learning Tree conference here at Clemson University earlier this year. And so there is a great partnership between our two organizations, and it's just wonderful that I've been able to come here and speak about SFI. And so my focus is really going to be about conservation outcomes, conservation impact of the Sustainable Forestry Initiative. But I'm going to give a little background, a little overview of who we are as an organization, as well as dive a little deeper into our standards before talking about some of the conservation outcomes that we're a part of. So SFI, our vision is a world that benefits from sustainably managed forests. And we go about that work by advancing sustainability through forest-focused collaboration. It is that forest-focused collaboration that I think sets SFI apart in any other organization that operates in this space. Everything we do is in partnership. Everything we do is in collaboration with other organizations. We know we don't have all the answers. We can't solve all the problems. And so it really is critical that we partner with organizations in helping to advance our vision and mission. We are overseen by an independent board of directors. And so it's an equal chamber of environmental, social, and economic groups. It is a senior level board of directors. And so right now, the chairman of our board is Dan Lamb, who is the president and CEO of the Auburn Foundation. Previously, it was Mike Doss, who is the president and CEO of Graphic Packaging International. And so it is a very senior level board It's this board that oversees all aspects of SFI, helps set our strategic vision, helps set our mission, helps set our priorities of SFI every year. So SFI, we are broken out into 4 key areas of work. Standards, which is what I oversee at SFI. Conservation, which I'm going to dive a lot more deeper into the conservation work that we're a part of. Education, and really that scope of work is really focused around Project Learning Tree is a program of SFI. And so how are we creating curriculum for K through 12th graders to understand environmental education in the classroom environment? But then after they graduate from high school, what are we doing at SFI to ensure they have mentorship and green job placement potentially so that they can continue that lifetime of learning within the green space? And so we're providing that whole lifetime of learning opportunity from K all the way to when they're professionals in various organizations. And then finally, community. And really that pillar is focused around how are we improving the communities in which we operate, which our certified organizations operate. And we do a lot of that work through our grassroots network, which are called SFI implementation committees. And we have these implementation committees in almost every state in the US and Canada. And a lot of that work is driven through those SICs is what we call them, SFI implementation committees. It's a complicated slide. All this is to show is that we went through a big theory of change exercise last year. And it's a very good process, long process, but it really sets the vision for what we want to see as part of SFI 5 years from now. And so looking at it in all the pillars of work, whether in the standard, which is the upper left quadrant of really promoting responsible forestry and sourcing globally. That is our key mission under our standards pillar. Under our conservation pillar, it's about how we're providing nature-based solutions from that SFI footprint where our organizations operate in the US and Canada. And so there's different long-term objectives and short-term objectives as part of this theory of change, but it's important because this really sets how we operate in our work plan year after year, at least for the next, at least until 2030. So looking at the SFI standards specifically, we have 5 key standards, and I'm going to quickly touch on 2 of them, which have probably the greatest conservation outcomes and conservation impact. The first being our forest management standard, and the second being our fiber sourcing standard. And the fiber sourcing standard, that is unique to SFI. No other group has a standard that does what fiber sourcing does in the US and Canada. And I'll get into details on that. Chain of custody, I'm not going to get into. Chain of custody really is a tracking system to account for how the tree is harvested, making sure it's coming from certified lands all throughout the supply chain so that when you get that product with an SFI label, you can be assured that it's gone through that tracking system. Then we also have a standard focused in Canada for Indigenous peoples and families. And I mentioned briefly our urban and community forest sustainability standard, which is very new and it's great because we're now in the urban forestry space. And in the past, we've really just been in traditional forestry. And so it's a whole new segment of work for us as well. So all of these standards require third-party certification. It is the third-party audits that really give SFI that credibility. So we write the standards, we have organizations use our standards, but then it's the third parties, these audit firms that actually will do audits to those organizations to make sure they are meeting the intent of our standard. And so an organization, they could choose one of these 7, 8 audit firms to do those audits. But this really gives SFI that credibility because again, it's not we're saying that organization is doing the good things. It's not the organization saying they're meeting the intent of our standard. It's these third-party auditors that are doing that assessment. So our forest management standard, it only applies in the US and Canada. It is designed for landowners or land managers who manage or own forest land. Most of the lands under the forest management standard are medium or larger landowners. So landowners who may own 100,000 acres all the way up to, in Canada, there's ownership of 30 million acres of land. And so this standard really sets those requirements for how those organizations have to manage their forest land in a sustainable way. With all of our standards, we update them every 5 to 7 years. So you can see the title of this one is SFI 2022. We last updated it in 2022. We're set for another revision process probably next year. The revision process usually takes about 2 years to complete. It's really an incredible process. And over the last standard revision, we probably had about 1,000 individuals that submitted comments and attended our webinars and our sessions to help design and develop this standard that we have today. So that standards, both the forest management and our fiber sourcing standard, which I'll talk about in a second, it's made up of objectives, performance measures, and indicators. And within the SFI structure, the objective is the highest level of performance an organization has to meet in order to achieve the standard. Then under each objective, you may have 2, 3, 4 performance measures. And then under each performance measure, there might be 2, 3, 5 indicators. Overall, there's 17 objectives and about 109 different indicators. I think there's about 50 something performance measures. And so all of these have to be met in order for that organization to achieve certification. One of the really cool things, and I'll dive a little deeper in a little bit on specifically objective 9, climate smart forestry. So this is the highest level of performance an organization has to meet. And whenever we introduce new objectives, it's a big deal within the SFI community. That means it's a new leadership that we're really taking an initiative on of saying we can help make a difference on this specific topic through the requirements in our standard. So in the last 2020 revision, we launched Objective 9, which is climate smart forestry. So how are organizations managing their lands, both from a mitigation and adaptation standpoint, to have a difference on those lands in a climate smart way? We also introduced Objective 10, which is our fire resilience and awareness objective, which again, we're taking a leadership position saying that organizations need to manage their lands to help avoid catastrophic wildfire, but also educate the public about what it means and the benefits of both negative and positive wildfire. So this too was another core objective that we elevated in our last standard revision process. It's an alphabet soup of the different acronyms out there. SFI, we're not alone in this space. There are many different certification standards that operate just like we do. Globally, there's probably about 50, 70 different standards that operate similar to what we do. The good thing with all of this is, I don't know if I have it in here, but basically you have 2 umbrella organizations, the Forest Stewardship Council, FSC, and PEFC, the Program for the Endorsement of Forest Certification. They're both umbrella organizations. They set criteria on an international level, and then standards get endorsed under one of those 2 umbrella organizations. SFI, we're endorsed under PEFC, and basically what that allows is SFI, we're a well-known brand here in the US and Canada, but it allows us to market ourselves as PEFC, where PEFC is well-known in Europe and Asian markets. And so again, it provides that global recognition across the frameworks. SFI, we are continuing to grow. These are the amount of lands that are certified to our forest management standard. About 370 million acres, and we're growing year after year, which is good because that shows that there's value and there's increased uptake for requiring products to be certified. But all of this really boils down to only 10% of the world's forests are certified under any of these standards that operate globally. And so we're doing great things on that 10%, but we need to ensure that that other 90% is being looked after. And so how do we go about to ensure that there's still good forestry happening on that 90% of the lands that might not be certified? I mentioned how SFI, we just operate in the US and Canada, but we represent a huge global part of the overall certified land. And so even though we're endorsed under the PEFC umbrella, if you were to just separate out FSC with all their endorsed standards, PEFC minus SFI, and then SFI as a standalone, we represent about a third of the certified land globally. And so that means there is a lot of supply that could use SFI globally because of the amount of land that is certified under our standard. So the fiber sourcing standard really gets to that question of, okay, you're doing great things on the lands that are certified, the lands that people own, control, manage, the reforestation, the biodiversity, the climate smart forestry, the fire resilience and awareness. But what are you doing on the other land that may not be certified? This is what makes SFI unique. We have what's called our fiber sourcing standard. It really applies to the manufacturer, that mill who is producing the product. And what are they doing to ensure their procurement is still coming, that they're still procuring from good forestry operations, and they're elevating the conservation benefits of all the fiber that comes, not just the certified land, but also the non-certified fiber that they may get in their supply chain as well. And so it really puts the onus on the manufacturer to make a difference on that entire landscape of their sourcing supply. Similar to the forest management standard, our fiber sourcing standard has 11 objectives. And again, it's broken out into objectives, performance measures, indicators. And just pointing a few is objective 1, biodiversity and fiber sourcing. That basically means that the manufacturer, that mill, they have to do landscape assessments to ensure that the biodiversity is being protected across all of their sourcing region. You know, these sourcing regions can be 100, 150, 200 mile radius around that mill sometimes. And so how are they elevating biodiversity across that landscape? Another key one is objective 3, which is they have to ensure they are using qualified resource professionals and logging professionals. What that means is that they have to ensure that the loggers that are out there harvesting these small landowners, you know, the fiber from these non-certified lands, that they're using these loggers that have been trained in sustainable forestry attributes, because it's really that logger that's the direct connection between the landowner and the mill. And if you can train that logger in looking for streamside buffer zones and looking for threatened and endangered species, then indirectly you can have an additional benefit across that entire landscape. And so it's really been a cornerstone of the SFI program over the last 30 years are these requirements in the fiber sourcing standard, which, yes, you can talk about all the incredible requirements on the forest management side, because that's where organizations own or manage land. But how can you talk about the conservation benefits on that other fiber that may enter the supply chain that may not come from those certified land bases? And so here's just a graphic illustration. You have that fiber sourcing mill. In the middle, they may be sourcing from many different landowners. Some may be certified, some might not be certified, but it really puts that responsibility on that mill to look at the biodiversity, look at the water, ensuring that they're using trained loggers as part of their program's sourcing policies. So some of the impacts of this standard. When we started 30 years ago, we surveyed the SFI organizations, and we found that only 34% of those organizations were using loggers that have been trained in sustainable forestry. Because of the requirements in the standard, we're now over 95%. 96% of all loggers who are delivering wood, logs to those mills have been trained in sustainable forestry. And so that is just making an incredible difference, again, across the entire landscape, because it's really that logger who can do a lot of good or a lot of bad, depending on how they're trained to harvest that fiber on the land. And so That is one, I think, incredible stat of just the impact that we've seen because of the SFI requirements. We've also seen National Association of State Foresters come out and praise the important contributions because of the SFI fiber sourcing standard. They have seen improved best management practices of water quality and training and landowner outreach, again, because of the fiber sourcing standard. And then EPA back in 2016, again, recognized the role of SFI in our fiber sourcing standard on improved BMP implementation through logger training and outreach efforts. But we've also seen scientific studies. Pete in the back has published 2 of these where it says that implementation rates on lands where fiber sourcing is implemented, you have better water quality rates than on those lands that aren't. And again, because of the SFI fiber sourcing standard, we've seen a lot of those great conservation impacts on the ground. So diving a little deeper into the conservation side, and I mentioned a little bit of our goal here is to advance credible and effective solutions to the environmental challenges through our standard. So we go about our conservation work a few ways. One is every year we survey our SFI certified organizations. This gives us incredible data, incredible metrics to understand the cumulative performance across our entire footprint of our certified organizations. So what are our organizations doing on reforestation, harvesting, biodiversity, water? And this really provides a lot of great baseline metrics to see how we're improving year after year. So SFI within our standard, one of the objectives is to support forest research. This is unique to SFI. No other certification standard has an objective that specifically says the forest sector, those organizations who are certified to our standard, they have to support forest research. Over the last year, there's been about 560 different projects with 520 unique partners that we gathered through our annual reporting process. We understand that the organization certified to our standard, because of the requirements in our standard, they're supporting various sectors and various research projects. And so we know that since SFI was started back in the mid-90s, about $2.1 billion has been directly invested because of the SFI standard. And of that, 67 million just last year in forest research. And you can see the breakout of the different types of research projects, whether it's looking at biodiversity or forest health or climate change or landscape ecology. And so 78% of all those research dollars from those organizations who are SFI certified are really going to conservation related objectives within our standard. So we've been doing this for years, the research requirement, but what we wanted to do about a decade ago was reward those organizations and really provide our own funding to help those organizations in looking at conservation impact of our standard. And so we knew that there are, $2.1 billion since SFI was started back in 1995, but how can we help contribute to that and help encourage more research across core themes of how is the conservation impact impacting water, biodiversity, carbon across the SFI footprint? And so we started this work about a decade ago, and we've awarded about 74 different conservation grants, about $4.8 million, and leverage it's about 13.2. But really what that's allowed us to do is elevate the work and working with groups all across the sector. You can see the different organizations that we're working with on our carbon and climate projects or biodiversity projects or the water projects, the work that we did with Pete at University of Georgia when he was there, or NatureServe and how we're looking at biodiversity across the landscape, or carbon and working with American Forests and NC State University in elevating what does it mean if you're certified to the standard, what is that impact that you're having on these topics? And so we've published a great study, a decade of success of conservation impact work that you can download off our website, where you get a good synopsis of a lot of these different research projects that really dive deeper into the impact that the standard has had on the ground. So looking at our climate smart forestry objective, that was new this year that I mentioned, or in 2022. It's new to the standard that's out there right now. And because it's new, we needed to understand, what does that mean? Is it a big change for the forest sector to implement a lot of these requirements and a lot of these practices? And so the performance measures basically say that the organization, they need to identify and address the climate change risks, and then they need to identify and address the opportunities to mitigate the effects associated of its forest operations on climate change. And so because of that, and there might be some organizations that were already doing this, but in our survey, we found that about 50 to 60% of the organizations, they had never done this before. And so how can we help organizations move that along to, again, meet our standard requirements? So last year, we launched what we are calling our Climate Smart Forestry Initiative. And it's really work to how we can better elevate and advance the interpretation and implementation of climate smart forestry practices across the entire landscape. And we're doing this in collaboration with many different organizations, again, part of that forest focused collaboration that we're so a part of. But it's really looking at the enhancing the carbon sinks and reducing emissions from the forest sector, and at the same time looking at that through the lens of wildfire as well, which is so prevalent in Canada and in the Western US. And so so through this Climate Smart Forestry Initiative, we've really started to develop and design, okay, what are the regional risks that you have? And so we're publishing documents to help organizations in the Southeast US, in the Northwest US, in the Northeast and Lake states, to help look at what are their climate risks, to then make informed decisions on how they can do forestry maybe different. Maybe they're already doing something that helps reduce that risk and reduce that opportunity. But it's not a one-stop fit all approach. Just because a landowner here has a risk doesn't mean the landowner over there might have a risk. And so all of these are you know, there's always trade-offs, right, with anything that you do in forestry. And so through the risk assessment, they can then have these informed climate related procedures and documents to help them understand, do I need adaptive management? Do I need to change silviculture? Do I need to do something different on residuals and management, or is what I'm doing now great? And so again, it helps them with informing these decisions on how they might manage their lands in the future for these climate risks. And then finally, we publish and produce a ton of documents and a ton of internal technical briefings, white papers, explainers, technical guides, and we do have quite a bit of webinar content as well on our website. And so this again, you know, helps distill a lot of the information down to what does it mean for brand owners who may be asking for a certified product, or what does it mean to the investment community who's requiring how they're looking, how the forest sector is looking at risk for biodiversity and water and climate. And so again, these explainers help with a lot of that communication. And this really is a lot, you know, we've had the typical demand over the last 30 years for certification, really driven by a lot of the big box retailers like Home Depot, Lowe's. Where's my wood coming from? You know, the office supply sector, where's my paper coming from? Amazon now, where's my packaging coming from? Walmart, are the products that I'm selling in my store, the forest-based products, are those coming from certified operations? But where it's really shifted over the last few years is the investment community. They're asking these tough questions now. They want to know that the companies they're investing in, whether it's the big Georgia Pacifics or International Paper or Graphic Packaging or Warehouser, that they're looking at these risks. So they're not investing in risky operations. I could spend probably an hour just talking about investment community, sustainability initiatives, sustainability frameworks, but these are a lot of the drivers these days of where certification has evolved is in understanding these risks, whether it's global initiatives or specific dedicated groups like the the task force on nature related financial disclosures or other consortium. We're also seeing governments really pushing a lot of these policies now, more so than we did in the past. And again, looking at these important issues. And so here's again a very complicated slide. I'll just distill it real quick in that, you have a lot of these sustainability frameworks that a lot of the forest product sector, they're having to complete these surveys from groups like the nature related financial disclosure and looking at biodiversity and nature risks in their supply chain. So how do we align what those requirements are in TNFD with what SFI requirements are? And so if an organization is certified to SFI, how can they use that to then prove that they meet the TNFD survey requirements as well? And so that's been a lot of the work that we've been doing as of late is really, again, showing that value proposition of what certification can deliver with a lot of these increasing market pressures from the investment community. European Union as well has been driving a lot of policy. Some haven't been pleased with a lot of their direction, some have encouraged it, but in short, the European Union, they have a new green initiative, and as part of that, there's probably about 20 different regulations that they've introduced over the last 5 years. One of those is specific to no deforestation. So any forest-based commodity, wood, paper, cocoa, beef, any forest-based commodity that goes into the European market has to ensure that it is not contributing to to deforestation or forest degradation. And so again, how can SFI and forest certification be a value add for a lot of these policies where the policies may not specifically reference certification, but what can we do to ensure that if you are certified to our standard, you're meeting a lot of these policies? And so EUDR, they value and they recognize certification as a proof point. So how can we, again, help with that bridge between what these policies are requiring and what certification does? Because oftentimes it's not a one-to-one match. You have to show the value that certification does with a lot of these different policies as well. And so I think in the next 10 minutes or so, I'll just quickly talk about our annual conference. I encourage, if you are interested in attending, it's a great opportunity to network and meet with all different people within the forest sector. It's not just industry, but we get a lot of conservation, universities, government organizations that attend our conference. And so this year it will be, or next year, I guess, it will be in Montreal the first week of May. And so with that, I'm happy to dive into some questions if you have any. Yes.
So I have one question, like how the SFI is impacting the carbon market? Like,
Yeah.
is there any coordination, or because like the landowners, they try to extend the harvesting time, and because of that, there might be high risks and issues. So how the SFI is addressing that impact?
Yeah, so we are not directly engaged with the carbon markets. However, many of the organizations that are require certification as part of just baseline. You have to be certified There are other groups that are working. I know the American Forest Foundation has been doing a lot of work with small landowners in looking at carbon markets and what that means for small landowners. There are a lot of SFI certified organizations that are independently a part of some of those carbon markets as well, but that's not one of the requirements within SFI. Instead, we're looking at it more from a management standpoint in that how are you managing for climate, both from a risk perspective, but also opportunity perspective in the future. And that then helps feed into these voluntary carbon markets who are setting requirements and standards that then recognize SFI as a baseline before you can even be part of it. Yeah. Yes.
You mentioned a bit about like the training of like forest harvesters and loggers
Yeah.
and stuff. I'm curious to see, like, to hear more about that, what that looks like.
Yeah, absolutely. So within our standard, we have requirements, core requirements, secondary requirements on what it means to be a trained logger. And I mentioned our SFI implementation committees, those grassroots network committees that operate across the US and Canada. It's really the responsibility of those SICs to set those training courses and provide that opportunity, whether it's in-person trainings or virtual trainings. And then they keep databases of those loggers and those logging companies that have been trained per the SFI standard. And then they'll send that out to all the certified organizations in that state, or maybe multi-states have MOUs to look at, they maybe cross-border stuff, an operation in Georgia may be harvesting from South Carolina. So how can you ensure that the logger had been trained? And so these databases exist to then verify that they are using trained loggers. And then they have to report, the companies then have to report to us every year how much of the fiber that goes into the mill came from the loggers that have been trained. But there's a whole set of requirements. There's some OSHA requirements in there as well, but most of it is focused around environmental and sustainable forestry type elements that they may not have been privy to before SFI. Did that?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Yes.
Hi, thanks. So you talked a little bit about some of the incentives for certification, for manufacturers and landowners in terms of consumer demands and some of those policies as in the EU. But are those the primary incentives for certification, or are there other sort of bigger financial incentives at play? And then I think the other part of that question is, what do you see as the biggest challenges? So what's causing, landowners to not pursue that certification? And
Yeah, so great question. So certification in 30 years ago when it was first developed, there was always this wish that if I had a piece of certified lumber next to a non-certified lumber in the Home Depot, that consumer would go up and say, yeah, I want to buy this more expensive certified piece of lumber. That's not the case. There's some niche markets that there are price premiums for, but certification has been driven by the brands requesting it, by the investors requesting it. So it's really just been a cost of doing business. If you want to continue to play in these markets, if you want to continue to sell to the Home Depot or sell to Walmart, sell to Amazon, you have to be certified, especially in North America. Different in other parts of the world, but in North America, you have to be certified. That's from the manufacturing standpoint. From the landowner standpoint, it's very different. And that's, so I talked about our fiber sourcing standard, and many of you may know, but many of you may not, that the majority of ownership in the US is small private landowners, people who may own 5, 10, 100 acres of forest land. They're not managing those lands for timber production. They're probably managing those lands for other values, recreation, wildlife, something else. Maybe timber harvesting, timber production is something that happens once in a lifetime to pay for some big event, like a wedding or graduation or something. But that is where the majority of all fiber comes from these small landowners. the cost of certification just doesn't make sense for these small landowners. That is why the fiber sourcing standard is so important, is because it puts the onus on the mill to look at the entire landscape instead of each individual landowner. And so if you can elevate the entire landscape through those fiber sourcing requirements, then you can be assured of responsible forestry happening across that entire landscape. And so the cost proposition for the medium to larger landowners, 100,000, and I said in Canada, there's 30 million acres that are certified for some of these landowners. It makes sense. You have to do that. The investment community is requiring it of you. But small landowners, they're really not. And so that's where fiber sourcing comes into play. But it still is very much market driven. The markets are just different. They still are the big box, Amazon, Walmart are still driving it, but the investment community now is a huge driver. The government regulation, a huge driver. We're seeing new markets like the mass timber industry really driving, I want to, the cathedral and the new forestry complex, are using mass timber, but a lot of these architects that aren't familiar and builders that aren't familiar with forestry, they're like, yeah, we want to use mass timber. It's great for a carbon story. It's great for aesthetics, the look and feel, but we want to make sure we're not deforesting. We want to make sure we're not hurting biodiversity. And so again, that's where certification plays into it, is that it can help provide those assurances to the architectural community that may not have been familiar with forestry over the years. And so there are a lot of different new innovative sectors. Textiles is another one where the clothes, they're using more fiber-based materials these days because it's just a better carbon story, a better recyclability story. Sustainable aviation fuels as well. We're seeing a lot of the big airlines looking at how can we use biomass and tree-based material for biofuels. And again, certification plays into that. So there's a lot of neat, innovative products that are coming. It's not just the typical big box that we're seeing. There's many market drivers these days.
Jason, we have a question online from Rob Baldwin. It says, can you address the perception that FSC is a more strict, environmentally sustainable system? Why do landowners select one over the other?
Great question. So FSC, Forest Stewardship Council, it also operates in the US and Canada. And so it is a perception, and that's what I would say first and foremost. And it's not reality. SFI, FSC, if you were to go into an SFI certified forest or an FSC certified forest, you wouldn't notice the difference. The requirements may be different in our standards, but the outcome and the results are the same. SFI, we were developed here in North America, understanding North American forestry, understanding those small landowner issues. FSC was developed in a global scale. They're developed originally in some of the developing countries to provide assurances that product from Brazil, product from Mexico, products from other tropical regions weren't causing deforestation. That's not so much an issue here in North America. And so what we've been able to do is say, yeah, you need to not practice deforestation and forest degradation, but because of the strict environmental laws that we already have as the floor in the US and Canada, we can do so much more than just looking at the floor. And so our requirements really have elevated, I think, responsible forestry, sustainable forestry across the entire landscape over the last 30 years. But it really is, unfortunately, a perception. And I've spent a lot of my time getting into a lot of those similarities, differences. I would say there's a lot more similarities these days than differences between the two programs. But there's also things that we are going well beyond FSC in our research, in our climate smart forestry initiatives, and how we're looking at non-certified fiber through our fiber sourcing standard. And so there are elements that we are going well beyond FSC in what our standard requires. Yes.
I have a question. What does SFI do in order to be more for example, more innovative and more visible to the public, so it can attract more customers to this company. So what does it do? Means, does it, for example, does it apply the smart, specific, measurable, attainable, and relevant and timely goals? Or what kind of activities or goals does it use in order to be more visible to the public?
Yeah, great question. So what are we doing to help build that consumer recognition and that marketplace recognition? That's a lot of the work that I do. And so I don't have a slide on here. I did in Puneet's class, but we've done a lot of consumer survey testing over the years. And the most recent one was done by the Shelton Group, which is a sustainability marketing firm based out of Tennessee, and one of the premier marketing firms. And they did testing of various certification labels and with consumers in the US. And what was found is that 60+% of US consumers recognize the SFI label. And of those, 90% trust the label. So if they see the label, they recognize it, then they trust SFI. There are, and that research also showed that more and more consumers are looking to third-party certification programs to help with their buying decisions. They want to know that the products they're buying aren't contributing to these global sustainability challenges that they may read about every day. They want to know that these third-party certification standards like SFI are making a difference. And so there is good consumer research that we are seeing a lot of good trends. We're also seeing the SFI on product label being used more and more on product. 85% of our certified organizations are saying that they have had increase in demand for certified product. And so a lot of it has been business to business driven, maybe between that manufacturer and Amazon, that manufacturer and Walmart. Some of it is investment driven, but a lot of what the investors are hearing, a lot of what the big brands are hearing is consumer driven. And so that is where they're wanting to ensure that they're not doing anything that, you know, that they could have a black eye in the media because they're buying product from some land base that may have been deforested or degraded. And so they need to ensure these certification programs help provide those assurances.
Also, another question: what does the SFI do in order to, means, for example, to solve problems like, for example, the forest fires and how to keep the forest healthy? How to keep the forest healthy? Like, for example, there are some insects that harm the trees, and then they, for example, they affect the tree branches. So I'm giving just examples about problems that forests might face. So does the SFI do lots of efforts in order to find solutions to these problems?
Absolutely, and we do that through our standard requirements. We have objectives built around forest health, and you know, the Climate Smart Forestry has built-in requirements around forest health, and objective 10 around our fire resilience and awareness, you know, focuses specifically on wildfire and what an organization should be doing to manage their lands to help avoid those catastrophic wildfires. But then also a lot of the research projects that we're doing, a lot of the work through our Climate Smart Forestry initiative in looking at these risks. These risks are real for these organizations who are managing, you know, large amounts of land. And so, yes, we have it through our standard requirements, we have it through research projects, and then we have it through on the ground, you know, guides and manuals that organizations can use to ensure that they're managing for these risks.
Yeah, and also, does the SFI manage different forests, means different species of forest, for example, longleaf tree pines, and also other types of forests? Does it also help forests for different species of trees in forests?
Absolutely. If you're managing to the SFI forest management standard, it's either going to be managed as a natural stand, a native stand, or a semi-natural planted stand. And so that is just the inherent requirements within SFI. And we apply to all different forest types across the US and Canada. So whether it's longleaf, pine or it's the boreal forest, Doug fir pine. Our standard applies to all those different forest types across the US and Canada.
Thanks so much.
So can I just throw on there?
Yeah,
So I think one of the things is that there are very prescriptive standards officially. I think I would say in 30 years ago, FSC was a very prescriptive, if you're in this kind of forest. And they actually had standards that were for certain forest types, very regional standards. When we created SFI, and I was a part of creating that, so 30 years ago, 40 years ago, 35 years ago, we started talking about it. We came up with a standard and the objectives and performance measures that we set as goals so that it was one standard. Everybody had to meet the standard, but recognizing that if I'm in Douglas fir in the Pacific Northwest, I'm in Florida on longleaf pine, I'm in Maine and spruce pine fir, or I'm in South Carolina upstate and I've got mixed hardwoods and shortleaf and live pine, that how I did it, what I did in recognizing what those forests were and how I managed them had to be specific to the forest I'm on. So you had to go out and understand the forest. I couldn't go out and clear cut everything and plant eucalyptus in the upper state of South Carolina. And believe me, I have had companies that asked me to do that when I was a practicing forester. That is not gonna be what we're gonna do. We had to do it in the way, but that's why we did a performance-based standard rather than a prescriptive-based standard. It didn't say, well, it did say you had to have green up requirements, 5 to 7 years. But it didn't say you have to do green up requirements by planting XYZ species on this spacing. It said you just got to get everything greened up because you can't clear cut one stand next to each other. Yes, that's an example still in the system, I think, right, Jason?
correct,
Yeah.
yeah.
So prescriptive versus performance gives you a lot of variability. There are some places, and again, I think would you say FSC has moved to more, are they still very prescriptive or are they more performance-y? As they've gone to a single standard for the nation of US.
They still have regional variation in some parts of the
Yeah.
country, but for the most part, it's an outcomes-based standard, just like SFI.
Yeah.
It's what are you doing to achieve this certain outcome?
Yeah. So some of these more prescriptive standards realize that you cannot prescribe everything on every acre. And this is one of the things that I'm just gonna go on a rant. I can take two landowners side by side, same soils, same basic forest, and they may have different outcomes that they want to achieve. Neither one of those outcomes is wrong, but you get there by different methods to achieve their outcomes. That is a very important part of being a professional forester, of being a professional wildlife biologist, of being a professional in fisheries. Knowing how the pathways may wander to get to what landowners who want it or public entities who want water quality, how we get there, and understanding what the landowner has in store or what the overarching thing is in store. And this is why I'll shut up. I'm off my rant.
Thanks, Pat.
One more
Yeah.
question on
Go
that.
ahead, yeah.
You might have to explain what this question is from because there's a lot of acronyms. What is SFI's role in EUDR compliance?
Yeah, and so that was sort of the last slides that I spoke about, and this is the European Union Deforestation Regulation, EUDR. EUDR essentially is requiring that if you're placing product in the EU market, that product has to be verified that it's deforestation free. It has to be produced where there's low risk in that country. US and Canada have been designated as low risk. And then you essentially have to provide a statement assuring the EU of all these requirements. And so certification doesn't necessarily give companies a green lane as part of EUDR compliance, but EUDR has said in their guidance and their FAQs that certification can be used as a good valuation for assessing deforestation and forest degradation risk. Now, there is a requirement within EUDR that says you have to geolocate to the exact parcel where that fiber came from. And that's almost impossible to do when you start looking at paper products, packaging products. And so that has been a struggle in how that can actually be implemented in a landscape like the US, where there are just thousands of small landowners that are supplying a single mill, and then that mill may be producing lumber, that sawdust or residuals, then may go into a pulp mill. And so how can you start tracking that paper product and where that paper product came from that exact parcel of land? And so that's been a big challenge that that the US forest sector as well as the Canadian forest sector have been aligned on as far as those challenges. But again, it's all commodities. So palm oil, beef, cocoa, it applies across all forest-based commodities, the regulation. And I was reading the palm oil industry, something like 1 million pieces of information could be in 1 barrel of palm oil. And there's thousands of barrels of palm oil potentially going into a product. And so it's a big challenge, I think, that the European Union is trying to work through. They've delayed this regulation at least once. There's talks of maybe delaying it again. But right now, certification, it doesn't get a green lane, but it can be used to help an organization. Yes.
Just to add to that, so PEFC has a UDR module in their standards recently. I just went through the module recently. So yeah, and SFI being endorsed by PEFC kind of top of the chain of structuring towards PEFC as well. So it is like UDR standard is already here for SFI as well.
Yes, yes. So there have been sort of in SFI, we have our own module as well for EUDR compliance, but not all organizations sell into the European Union, and so it's not a voluntary part of SFI. Yeah.
Great. Well, we're at our time for today. Please feel free to come up and talk to Jason afterwards. Let's thank him one more time.
Oh, good one. Purposes of. No, I believe you all are. So then I will see. But can I see your bird? I don't know, it's kind of a.
So this SFI.
What do you think?